Alrighty, howdy folks. Welcome back to Season 2, Episode 2 of the Suhu podcast. Last week we were talking about natural and organic. What do these things mean? And this week in our Spring Reveals What's Inside segment, we are going to be talking about plant-derived. What does plant-derived actually mean? It's definitely one of those phrases that we're seeing pop up all over the place in skincare. It sounds precise, like it means something very specific. It's very reassuring. Like, we all love plants, and most people hear it and they think about something gentle or close to nature or maybe minimally processed. But chemically, the phrase is much broader than people might realize. When an ingredient is described as plant-derived, the only thing that's guaranteed is where the starting material came from. It does not tell you how the ingredient was processed. It does not tell you how stable it is. And it does not tell you how it's going to behave on your skin. So today we want to slow that down a bit. Again, we're not trying to dismiss these terms, but we want to understand what they're actually communicating. Because once you separate the origin from the behavior, a lot of the confusion around skincare labels starts to clear up. So Lydia, from the chemistry side, when we say something is plant-derived or plant-based, what does that actually tell us about the molecule itself?
Right. So where this really matters, I think, is like if you're looking at a compound, a single compound that needs to cause some sort of functional effect. Those compounds could be made in the lab. We talked last week a little bit about salicylic acid, which is an ingredient. It's one molecule. It's a compound. You could call it molecule, compound, whatever. Essentially, like, that can be purified out of willow bark and can go through processing and you get salicylic acid at the end, or you can make it in the lab, right? And you can also have salicylic acid at the end of that process too. And those molecules, if they're both purified and they are made correctly, then they should function the same way on your skin, as long as the formulation, is formulating their product correct. As long as the the brand is formulating their product correctly, right? And so when we think about plant-derived, right, it's like, oh, where was the origin of the ingredient? Was the original, ingredient from a plant, or was it not? And where this kind of starts to matter is more when you're looking at complex extracts or you're looking at essential oils. Like, those should always be derived from a plant. If you see a synthetic essential oil or a fragrance, right, like, that's not the same thing. People aren't making accurate dupes of essential oils. You're just not going to be able to do that. But if you're looking at individual compounds like salicylic acid or these other, THD ascorbate is a really good example. Vitamin E can be a good example. It gets purified down to, just the tocopherols. Really, you're looking at these more processed sort of individual molecules that people are using as ingredients in their products.
Awesome. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think somewhere that we might want to start is clarifying exactly what plant-derived really means there. So when something is labeled plant-derived, it simply means that the starting material came from a plant. That's it. There's no additional information being given. That is the entire promise. The ingredient might be a cold-pressed oil taken directly from a seed or a fruit, or it might be something extracted and refined from plant material, or it might be a molecule that started with plant sugars or plant oils and then went through several processing steps before ending up in a cosmetic formula. A good everyday example is glycerin. Glycerin is widely used in skincare as a humectant because it attracts water into the skin. We talked about glycerin a bunch in our winter skin series. A lot of glycerin used in cosmetics begins with plant oils. But by the time it's purified and used in the formulas that you're seeing on your shelf, what matters is the molecule itself and how it's going to behave on your skin. So the phrase plant-derived describes the feedstock, which, the plant oils and all that other stuff that's in the beginning. But it doesn't describe how much processing happened afterward. And this is where I think expectations can drift a bit. People picture plant-derived ingredients as unchanged botanicals. Like, we went to the garden, we grabbed the glycerin off the tree, and we put it into the formula. Many of these ingredients have been refined so that they're actually stable and predictable in a formula, which is important. So Lydia, maybe you could help us zoom in here on how this really works?
Yeah, I think, it kind of just goes back to aligning your values with what you are looking for in your skincare products. Like for me, right, like I'm vegan, and so when I look for products, I am interested in knowing that the original source material, if it wasn't made in a lab, whatever the original source material is, even like the ingredients that you might use in a lab to make a compound, right? Like I want to know that those ingredients did come from a plant ultimately, or they came from somewhere that wasn't like a living animal or a byproduct of an animal, right? So that can be super helpful when you're like looking at labels that say like vegan, for example, right? Like most of the certifications that are the vegan bunny certification or other vegan certifications, they, have the person or the brand go through and verify that that the base ingredients come from a plant, right? So that's important. And that's one way you can use those types of certifications to help. Also, as a vegan, I'm like, okay, well, I care about the environment as a whole too, right? And so now we kind of have to think about, okay, well, the ingredient is plant derived, but like how was the refinement process, and like what did the ingredient actually go through to get to your final product? And sometimes those processes are not very friendly to the environment. Sometimes people do a really solid job of synthesizing these in a lab without using nearly as much water or having nearly as much waste. So it's really interesting because it's kind of ingredient specific, and it's also supplier specific too, right? Like how the plant is grown matters, how it's processed matters, and like how it's used in the formulation matters too. So ultimately, if you're like an individual and you're trying to say like, oh, what's best for my skin, you kind of have to think about what do you care about and do a little research into the brand and their supply chain. But like ultimately, right, the thing that you care about usually most for your personal health is the product going to do the thing that it says it's going to do? And if the brand is being transparent about its ingredients and how things are made and using the right formulation for that specific product, then you can usually rely on that product as being consistent and safe. But, if you see red flags in other areas of the brand, or you notice that they're greenwashing, or it looks like they aren't really, doing due diligence on their essential oils and things like that, that's when you can start to understand more broadly that maybe their products aren't as effective as a brand that is, really taking into account all these different kind of factors.
Excellent. All right. So, yeah, I think that you've keyed in on the main thesis of this podcast, which is Plant-Derived is really just going to tell you about the origin. It's not really telling you about anything else. So then the next question is what processing actually does to those materials. I think there's a common belief in general that the less processed an ingredient is, the better it must be. Like we were saying earlier, people want to imagine that we're just grabbing the glycerin or the salicylic acid off the glycerin bush and salicylic acid tree and throwing it into our products. But that assumption doesn't really hold up once you look at how cosmetic ingredients actually work. Raw plant materials can be extremely variable. Their composition can change depending on things like harvest conditions and climate and soil, and processing often exists to remove that variability. Refinement can remove contaminants, it can reduce the oxidation risk, it can help ensure that the ingredients behave consistently every time you're using them. So processing isn't like an automatic like, oh, this is bad, we hate processing. In many cases, it's what actually allows an ingredient to be stable enough and safe enough and predictable enough to be applied to your skin. And without those steps, a lot of plant ingredients would spoil quickly or react pretty unpredictably. So Lydia, maybe you could tell us more about how these refinement processes work, what they're actually doing, and why we need purification and processing in our skincare.
Yeah, so there's so many good examples of this. I've been on an essential oil kick recently, so maybe we'll talk about those again. But, really like one of the most important things, right, like in your skincare product is that your skin is not going to be irritated by it. And when you have a product with many ingredients, especially if those ingredients are more unrefined or closer to the raw plant source, you have simply more molecules that your skin can react to. And essential oils are a really great way of thinking about this because essential oils are basically the steam distilled or expressed oil from the raw plant source. And that's like usually it's kind of crazy. Like you need a ton of rose petals to get a little bit of essential oil of rose, right? And the refinement process is actually super important because as you are steam distilling the plant, some of the molecules from the plant material is going into the essential oil, and others are basically being taken out in this purification process. And for some essential oils, this is really important because certain oils can be irritating to the skin. There are certain processes that you can do to actually remove those irritating molecules. And then there are certain processes that some extracts undergo that actually add additional molecules in that could potentially irritate your skin. And that's not to say that like an extract versus an essential oil is better or worse. It's just different processes introduce different new molecules, and they also take away molecules as well. And so what's really important is that you are buying your materials from a reliable source that has a consistent and well-defined process for creating their ingredient, right? And this goes true for labs as well. You know, like if you're making, for example, like THD ascorbate, basically taking vitamin C, we put on a fatty acid, and that creates a more oil-soluble, protected, more durable form of vitamin C. The production of that molecule, the actual chemical reactions, they take like a solvent, they take the starting materials, and more often than not, there's other processes going on in the background to make sure the lab is clean, to make sure that everything is functioning correctly, that the instruments are functioning correctly. So you want to know that wherever you're getting your material from, that lab is doing these processes correctly as well, right? So a lot of this boils down to trust, but trust can be helped out through like certifications and things like that. And kind of talked a little bit about that last week, but really looking for suppliers that have done their due diligence in creating their processes and also in their sourcing of the plant material.
I think THD ascorbate is such an awesome example too, because you can take an orange and you can squirt it all over your face, and there's some vitamin C in oranges, but that's not really going to do anything. The processing of that vitamin C really is what makes it useful for us. And I think maybe Lydia, you could tell us a little bit more about why we chose THD, or you chose THD ascorbate when you were formulating our vitamin C serum, and how the processing for that molecule actually makes it more effective for our skin.
Yeah, exactly. It's a great example of like where cosmetic research has really helped us make better products, and a good example of like where the word synthetic shouldn't be scary. I think like there are a lot of examples where like we prefer not to use maybe the synthetic version of something like an essential oil. It's better to use the real lavender plant than to go and get the fragrance, because the fragrance doesn't have any of the therapeutic benefit because it's a different molecule. But THD ascorbate is a cool example where, ascorbic acid on its own oxidizes really easily. It's mostly soluble in water-based serums. So, you're introducing water into the process, which increases, you need to use preservative then because you're increasing the risk of contamination. It's also a little bit more wasteful and overall degrades faster and doesn't penetrate your skin's barrier as well, because your skin is very lipophilic. It has a lot of oils in it, and so an oil-based serum is often like really nice for getting into the skin barrier. So THD ascorbate basically takes the ascorbic acid and it turns it into a much more oil-soluble molecule, meaning it's perfect in an oil-based serum, which is what we've created, and it penetrates a little deeper into the skin, as well as it doesn't break down as fast. So the serum is shelf stable much longer, and you can also use it more reliably like when you are going outside, for example, because you're not going to have it breaking down on your skin just from light exposure and things like that. So that's one example of where like
and that would still technically be plant derived, right? Even though it's gone through all this processing. But the processing still shouldn't scare us because it's making it more absorbable in our skin and less likely to oxidize or break down on our shelves.
Yeah, and I mean, I think with anything, right, it's like You want to look for what are the safety standards, like how long has this been around, like how long have people been using it, are there safety studies on it, like what happens in the body. And yeah, I think like this is an ingredient where it's pretty well understood and it breaks down in the body in a way that's easily processable by our cells naturally. And overall, I think it's a pretty solid ingredient. I think like, this always just comes back to this, right? It's like you look at a product and you're like, okay, what's the purpose of the ingredient? And if there's seemingly, if the purpose of the ingredient is like to enable a brand to make a product, let it sit on a shelf for 3 years and still sell it and it's still good for you, like that raises questions to me. If the purpose of the ingredient is like, hey, this is going to be, actually healthier and better for your skin in the long run, and here are the studies to show it, then that's great. So yeah, like synthetic is such an interesting word because it really just means a human created it, right, in the lab. But you have to look into the purpose of the molecule to really understand whether it's safe and healthy for you.
Okay, so if plant-derived is really just telling us about the origin of something and not really the processing or the refinement or the purification, then what actually determines whether an ingredient is going to work well on your skin at the end of the day is really the chemistry of it. So the skin barrier is structured around, if you were listening last season, we talked a lot about this, but structured around lipids like ceramides and cholesterol and fatty acids. And ingredients that integrate well into that system tend to be better tolerated. So the key factors are things like molecular size and polarity and stability and concentration within the formula. Two oils with very similar fatty acid profiles will behave very similarly on the skin at the molecular level. So what determines the outcome is formulation. Origin is part of the story, but it's just the beginning of the story. And what's going to determine the performance of your skincare is how it's formulated. So Lydia, that was all a lot of fancy chemistry words that I looked up before we started this podcast. What do they mean? How do these things like molecular size and polarity and stability and concentration and the formulation, how does that really all come together in our skincare bottles?
Yeah, I mean, so one way I like to think about this is like your skin is a protective barrier, right? And it's really engineered to keep things out. And just because, there might be an ingredient like vitamin C, and you can eat it in an orange. And actually, I want to take this moment to just say, the best kind of skincare, honestly, is to eat your skincare. Getting nutrients to your skin is really, 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 powerfully done through diet. And so whenever you're thinking about, eating healthy, it's you're eating healthy for not just your insides, but also the skin that shows on the outside, right? And when we think about designing products, especially when I'm thinking about it, I'm like, how can you supplement kind of this already healthy diet that you might be eating? And the reason for that is because a lot of the stuff that your body produces to make healthy skin, you cannot fit into your skin from the exterior. You can't buy a collagen cream and put it on your skin and have that collagen go into your skin in a meaningful way. You have to eat in a way where your body will produce more collagen. Or there are some cosmetic procedures you can do, like microneedling, that stimulate collagen production. But ultimately, just slapping some collagen protein onto your skin, it's too big. It's not going to get into your skin. It's not going to be processed in a meaningful way. At best, it's a moisturizer. So as a formulator, right, it's okay, how do you actually create a formulation that's useful to people? Retinols, retinoid, Retin-A is a good example. That actually does have an actual effect on not just your skin, but on the processes that are happening within your skin. And so I think the way to really think about this is going back to that whole what's the purpose of what you're doing, right? It's most skincare is strongest as a supporter for skin health, meaning you're looking for formulations that really support the skin barrier. It matters that you put it on the exterior. So you're looking for oils that balance out, what York was saying, the lipid profile of the skin. That's why jojoba oil is so nice, because it's a really beautiful mimetic or biomimetic of your natural skin oil. And so when you put that on, it actually helps increase the barrier strength of your skin. When you're looking at things that are actives, if you're looking at vitamin C, right, you want to look for formulations that actually use vitamin C that can penetrate deeper into your skin so that your skin can actually use it. A lot of vitamin C, if it's just ascorbic acid, yeah, of course, you can eat that in an orange and it's great and it'll go into, your body and it will have an effect. But like putting that on your skin is different, and like understanding how you get things into the skin, because again, it's designed to keep things out, is really important from like a formulation perspective. And keeping it simple is one of my principles. Like every ingredient that you introduce is essentially a potential irritant as well, right? And so when you're thinking about, again, if the primary goal is to protect the skin, we're looking at introducing the least number of potential irritants in the best way possible. And I think, essential oils are interesting because can be these really beautiful, like therapeutic elements to add to skincare. But again, they have to be done in a safe way, because if you're sourcing them from the wrong crop, or you've accidentally used a fragrance instead of the real oil, or you just, didn't understand the dosage, you can actually cause a lot more problems than you might have intended, right? And so it all just comes back to like, hey, how do we utilize the plants in an intelligent way, and how have people been using them historically, and how do we like take that knowledge and really build a beautiful product with it? And then for individual ingredients, how do we keep the product functional? How are we adding protection to the skin and reducing the possibility of irritation?
So does all of this mean that plant-derived is meaningless? No, I think at the top of the show, Lydia, you put it really well. Like, for a lot of people, ingredient origin matters a bunch because of sourcing values. If you're a vegan, you want to know that your products are coming from plants and not beef tallow or some other animal byproduct. You may prefer ingredients that begin with renewable agricultural sources rather than petrochemical feedstocks. So plant-derived can signal some alignment with plant-based formulations, and those are legitimate considerations. But what we're learning today is that how it actually acts on your skin, that's a chemistry thing. And Lydia, I think you put this well earlier as well. If you are just looking at the labels, you're missing a lot of the story. You want to find brands that are willing to give you information about what they're doing, how they're sourcing their stuff, how their ingredients are being processed, so that you can make an informed decision about what you're putting on your skin.
Yeah, for sure. And I would just end that by saying, like, nobody's perfect. And like, I think, a lot of smaller brands are like conscious of this. Like they are trying to build products that are, a little bit more sustainable, a little bit healthier, a little bit less non-toxic. And the way I like to think about it when I'm researching things is I see like, a big Venn diagram in my head where I'm like, okay, my sustainability element, my health element, my, functionality element, and whatever. Like you just got to make your little values Venn diagram and then kind of hone in and look for products that overlap as best as possible, because there's so much stuff out there, and like none of these talks are meant to like scare you and be like, oh my gosh, like my skincare is all terrible or something like that. No, it's just to inform you and like to give you the tools to like create those value-driven decisions in a more informed way.
And Lydia, if people want to know more about the ingredients we use, how can they find that information?
Yeah, so right now we have some information on all of our product pages. We try to give the origin as well as, what certifications the supplier has. And if there's processing information, that will be there as well. What I'm excited about is we are going to expand this effort over the next couple weeks. And so you'll be able to see eventually on our page kind of a big chart. I'm not 100% sure how I'm going to present this yet, but basically really detailed information on all of the suppliers that we get our ingredients from, even more detail. So if you're a really detail-oriented person, you'll be able to go there. But for now, you can look at our product pages.
And I want to point out, this is another podcast that was born from a comment/question that we got on Instagram. So I want to take this last little bit and pose that question directly to you, Lydia. Is Suhu plant-derived? Or plant-based?
Yes. So my answer is Suhu is vegan. So we do not use any animal products. We don't use any animal byproducts. And that will be true always. I would say we also strive to be cruelty-free. So we're looking at, I make that distinction a little bit because there are some vegan products that I don't consider completely cruelty-free. So we try to make our products vegan and cruelty-free. We're looking at the supply chain, and we are doing our best to always be moving in a direction that's more environmentally neutral or, net positive. So I think, there's always growth in that area, but like every time that we iterate on our products, we're like, how do we make this more sustainable? How do we understand this supply chain better? Things like that. So that's my answer is we are vegan and we are always improving on the sustainability side.
Thank you. I think that's an awesome answer. So yeah, I think in conclusion, the simplest way to think about plant-derived is this. It tells you where an ingredient began. It doesn't tell you how it behaves, and in skincare, what matters the most is the function of the final molecule on the skin. So once you separate those ideas, labels can become easier to interpret, and the language on the front of the bottle becomes a lot less confusing. If you guys want to go deeper on this topic, as always, we've published a blog on it at suhuskin.com/blog. And join us next week. We will be talking about, what is next week's talk?
Is it packaging?
Where ingredients actually come from. So we'll be diving even deeper into ingredient sourcing. We're really super stoked about it. And please always feel free to leave us comments, questions, etc. We love engaging with you guys. And we'll see you next week.
Bye.